Your person's friend reaction to your photo was shocking. Wait, pause for a second. Something quiet, something almost invisible has just shifted. If this message speaks to your heart, comment, "I receive this love." Like the video and subscribe for more. I was sitting on the edge of my couch, nightlight flickering just enough to make the room feel alive, when my phone buzzed. Not a new message, just a notification from the photo sharing app I use when I want to remember. No pressure, no expectations. I'd posted a picture I hadn't shown anyone in years. Me, half smiling, with a sunset painting the sky behind a lake I used to visit every summer. It was a moment that felt both distant and intimate, like a secret I kept in a drawer and then decided to dust off. That picture was a quiet way of saying, "I'm still here," to a part of me that had been quietly slipping away. The last time I'd spoken to Alex, who used to be my always-on-call person, had been months ago. We drifted after that awkward conversation about where things were going. I told myself I wanted space, I needed time, and the silence felt safe. Still, the memory of his laugh, the way he'd catch my eye across a crowded room, lingered in the background like an old song you can't quite place. When the notification popped up, it wasn't a like. It was a comment from Maya, a mutual friend we both trusted. She'd always been the one who could read the room, the one who could see the unspoken. Her words were short, but they held a weight I didn't expect. "You look peaceful here, like you finally found the part of you that's still waiting." I reread it, feeling the words settle into the quiet of my apartment. My chest tightened. Not in anger, but in a complicated knot of nostalgia and something else that felt like an ache. Maya's comment was simple, but it tugged at a thread that had been frayed for months. I wondered if she was trying to say something more. Was there a hidden apology in her tone? Or perhaps a gentle reminder that the distance I'd built between Alex and myself wasn't as solid as I thought. Stay with this, because there's a deeper emotional layer here. The more I thought about it, the more the image of Alex resurfaced. I could almost hear his voice, the soft mutters he'd make when we were watching movies. "You always pick the scenes where the sunlight hits the water just right." He'd loved those fleeting moments, the ones that never seemed big enough to put on a timeline, but meant everything in the instant they happened. Why was his memory knocking on the door again now? All because Maya saw a photo and chose those exact words. I tried to ground myself in the present. My phone screen glowed. The room stayed quiet, the nightlight still hummed. Yet inside, a tiny whisper grew louder. What if I'm still holding on to that part of me that wanted to be seen? It wasn't an accusation. It was a question that floated above my thoughts, light as a feather, yet heavy enough to make me pause. Alex hadn't called in weeks. He hadn't texted. I had imagined that his silence was a sign. Maybe he'd moved on, or maybe he'd decided I was no longer worth the emotional energy. I told myself I'd be okay, that my life didn't hinge on his presence. But there was this quiet part of me that still turned to the phone, waiting for a notification that never came. Maya's comment, though harmless on the surface, reminded me that I was still listening for a voice that had gone quiet. What happens next isn't loud, but it changes everything. I find myself scrolling back through our old messages, the conversations that once felt like a lifeline. I see the way Alex would write "Good morning" at 6 a.m., like a sunrise he wanted to share. I see the jokes that slipped between us, the silly emojis, the times we both pretended we weren't laughing at each other's terrible puns. In those moments I realize we never really stopped talking. The conversation simply slipped into the background, muffled by the noise of everyday life. A soft regret settles in. I think about the last time I reached out, the last time I heard his laugh, and the way we both pretended it wasn't ending. I wonder if I let the silence grow because I believed it was safer to protect my own heart. Maybe I was protecting his too. There's a part of me that silently apologizes for the way I walked away, for the unspoken goodbyes. And yet the feeling isn't entirely sorrowful. It's more of a gentle acknowledgement that we both moved perhaps a little too far. If you felt this shift too, you already understand. From Maya's comment, a new thought begins to surface. What if this wasn't a random observation? What if the universe, no, not in a grand prophetic sense, but in the soft, almost imperceptible timing of everyday connections, was nudging me? A quiet feeling that perhaps the timing doesn't need a grand sign, just a small, honest moment. The phrase divine timing floated through my mind, not as a religious proclamation, but as a gentle whisper that maybe some things happen when they're meant to, even if we can't see the whole picture. I notice a subtle sigh escaping me as I put the phone down. It isn't a gasp of panic. It's more like an exhale after holding my breath for too long. My mind drifts back to a rainy afternoon months ago, when Alex had offered to pick up my favorite coffee, and we talked for hours about nothing in particular. The conversation had slipped into silence, a quiet comprehension that perhaps they both needed space. Yet, the coffee was warm, the rain was gentle, and the moment felt right. And this is the part they're still trying to understand. Now, a new question bubbles up without any fanfare. Should I reach out? The idea is not a sudden rush of desperation. It's more like a small, steady pulse that grows each time I think about that old photo. I imagine the simple act of sending a text. Something like, "Hey, saw your comment. Thanks for noticing." And wonder if that tiny acknowledgement could open a door I thought I closed. Or perhaps I'm holding back because I'm scared the door opens too wide. I don't know. I just know there's a tiny whisper of curiosity that refuses to be silenced. I can almost feel the echo of my own breath as it syncs with the ticking of the clock. Time seems to stretch. Each second a reminder that the space between us isn't just measured in days, but in unspoken words and half-finished thoughts. I'm aware that every little pause in my day, every quiet moment when I hear my own heartbeat, is a subtle invitation to listen deeper to what's happening inside me. If this resonates, let it settle in you. One evening, after I put the phone away, I walked to the window and stared at the streetlights flickering on. The world outside was moving in its usual rhythm. Cars passing, distant sirens, people chatting on their balconies. Inside, my mind was replaying Maya's words again and again, each time adding a new layer. Peaceful, waiting, still. I felt a soft tug, not of panic, but of something like anticipation. A feeling that perhaps a small, honest conversation could shift the quiet dust that had settled between us. I tried to picture Alex's reaction. Would he smile at the memory, or would he feel the same knot of uncertainty? I picture his face, the way his eyebrows would lift when he was surprised, the way his eyes would soften when he was thoughtful. It's a comforting image, not because it's idealized, but because it's grounded in a reality I once shared with him. And in that gentleness I sense a tiny spark that perhaps the distance I felt wasn't as firm as I believed. And what they're beginning to realize now is something they can't ignore anymore. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and stared at the dim glow of the screen. It was close to dawn, the hour when the world feels both still and restless. My phone chimed a soft vibration, not a message, just the subtle ping of a like on the photo I'd posted yesterday. I blinked, and there it was. A small heart in the corner of the image, the kind Alex used when he wanted to say, "I see you," without saying a word. For a split second I felt a tug I wasn't prepared for. The heart wasn't a grand declaration. It was a flicker, an echo of a connection we'd once navigated with ease. My pulse briefly matched the rhythm of the notification, then steadied. A quiet confusion settled in my chest. Why am I still counting the little gestures? The question floated, unasked but unmistakable in its presence. Stay with this, because there's a deeper emotional layer here. AP pushed the phone away, trying to remind myself that I'd already decided to let the chapter rest on the shelf. Yet the faint light of his acknowledgement lingered, like a candle that refuses to go out when the wind shifts just so. I thought back to the first time I saw Alex's like on a picture of mine. It had been a low-key moment at a coffee shop, where we'd both been scrolling through feeds while two strangers chatted about the rain. He had pressed the heart without a comment, and I had felt a quiet warmth, an unspoken affirmation that felt more intimate than any text could capture. The memory came back to me in small snapshots. The way his eyes lingered on the camera when we were at the lake, the way his smile widened when the sun slipped behind the trees. We had never talked directly about what those moments meant. The silence between us had been a comfortable cushion, never a barrier, at least not for a while. It's odd how a single tap on a pixel can throw open a door you thought you'd locked. What happens next isn't loud, but it changes everything. Later that morning, while the sun was still a pale suggestion on the horizon, I found myself opening the photo again. I lingered on the part of the image where the water caught the first light. In that flash of orange, a fragment of a conversation resurfaced, a night we'd spent on the dock, both of us watching the water steady itself after a sudden gust. Alex had said, almost without thinking, "There's something about this place that makes everything feel right." I smiled then because it felt like a promise, but we never followed it up with anything more. The words hung there, half-spoken, waiting for a cue that never came. I caught myself replaying the phrase, wondering if, in that moment, we were both trying to articulate a feeling we didn't yet have the vocabulary for. Did we ever truly know what we felt? The question nudged my thoughts, gently pushing them toward a place I'd avoided for months. If you've felt this shift too, you already understand. A quiet sense of regret settled in, not the kind that pounds like a drum, but a gentle ache that settles into the ribs. I thought about the countless evenings when I could have reached out, when I could have sent a simple, "Hey, how's your day?" but chose instead to fold the effort into a silent, "It's okay." The habit of letting the space stretch felt safer than admitting that inside, a whisper had been asking for a louder voice. I notice how often my mind, in moments of stillness, starts to generate the what-ifs. Maybe I let the fear of vulnerability write the script. Maybe I convinced myself that the distance was a protective wall when in truth it was a veil. The clarity was slow, arriving not in a flash but as a series of tiny, steady breaths. With each exhale, the image of Alex's small heart reaction dimmed just enough for me to see the outline of something larger that we'd both kept hidden. Take a breath, let it linger, because the next layer is arriving. The realization didn't scream. It nudged. It felt as if the universe had adjusted the timing of a tiny thread, aligning two moments that had been running parallel for too long. Not a grand sign, but a soft sense that maybe the timing was right, not because the world announced it, but because my own inner calendar had finally opened a page I'd been marking. The phrase divine timing slipped into my thoughts, not as doctrine, but as a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes things fall into place without fireworks, just a gentle alignment. At that point, my finger hovered over the keyboard. I could imagine typing, "Saw your like, thanks for noticing." I could also imagine nothing more than a polite reaction, letting this small exchange drift as a memory. I felt the tug of two conflicting currents. The desire to protect the peace I'd built, and the yearning to test whether the small spark still existed. Should I write? The internal dialogue was soft, almost hesitant. If I send a message, will it feel like an opening, or will it feel like an intrusion? My thoughts turned over the phrase, "Just feel it," reminding myself that I didn't need to craft a perfect line, only one that felt honest. The hesitation was less about fear and more about respect for the boundary we'd both helped construct. If this resonates, let it settle in you. A memory from that lake floated up with crystal clarity. The night the fireflies danced just above the water, and Alex had rested his head on my shoulder without a word. We didn't need to name the feeling. The night itself became the sentence. In that same breath, I realized that naming was never the point. It was the texture of the moment that mattered. After the fireflies disappeared. Perhaps the like was just a digital echo of that same texture, a subtle reminder that the world still held pieces of that night. I saw myself not as a person kneeling at a crossroads, but as someone standing still, letting the wind whisper around me. That wind in my mind smelled faintly of pine and lake water, a scent I associated with Alex's presence. The more I let the feeling sit, the more it clarified. I wasn't just missing the person. I was missing the quiet intimacy we had cultivated without ever saying the words out loud. Optional biblical reflection. As I let this thought settle, a verse fluttered through my mind. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5. It didn't feel like a citation for validation, but a soft reminder that sometimes we have to trust the whisper of intuition, even when our rational mind doubts it. And so the idea of reaching out started to feel less like a gamble and more like an honest check-in. Not a grand confession, just a bridge built from a simple acknowledgement. Maybe I'll send a short line, see if it feels natural. Maybe I'll just keep the thought as a quiet companion in the background. The decision wasn't a cliff, but a gentle slope I could walk up at my own pace. You don't need to force this, just feel it. As the day unfolded, I found myself looking at the screen with a different expectation. The notification from Alex remained there, a tiny heart pulsing faintly. I imagined the possibilities. A reply that sparked a conversation about the lake, about the day's light, about everything that had been left unsaid. I imagined also the possibility that he might not respond, or that his response would be brief. The thought didn't frighten me as it once might have. Instead, it felt like a respectful nod to the past, a polite invitation to see if any of that quiet affection still held. I could feel my shoulders relaxing a little, as if the weight of unspoken words was being gently redistributed. The internal chatter shifted from, "What if he's moved on?" to "What if we both still have that gentle space?" The transformation wasn't sudden, but it was noticeable enough that I could sense an emotional pivot happening. What they're beginning to realize now is something they can't ignore any longer.